Welcome, everyone, to the preview webinar for Technology Radar, Volume 32. We are excited to have you with us today as we explore some of the key trends and insights we've uncovered in this upcoming edition, which is set to be released on April 2nd. I am Renan Martins. I'm the head of technology for Thoughtworks in Latin America. I'm based in Brazil, and I'll be guiding today's discussion. Okay. I'm joining by two amazing colleagues today from the Thoughtworks Technology Advisory Board, the team behind the radar. I have Neil Ford and Nimisha Ashtagiri here. Nimisha, would you mind introducing yourself?
Thank you so much, Renan. Hello, everybody. My name is Nimisha. I also go by Nim. I'm based in the Boston area here. I've been at Thoughtworks for over 3 years now. I'm a digital platform strategist, is a hat that I wear. I've had past titles such as consulting CTO and chief architect as well. Glad to be here.
Thanks, Nimisha. And Neil, I believe you've been part of every Radar edition since the very beginning. Am I right? Would you please introduce yourself as well?
I'm happy to. My name is Neil Ford. I am a distinguished engineer here at Thoughtworks. I've been a part of every radar except one. I missed one in China a decade ago or so, but I've been involved in just about all of these adventures. I've been with Thoughtworks 20 years. 2 days after the radar comes out will be my 20-year anniversary at Thoughtworks. So I've been at Thoughtworks for a little while now, and it's always a pleasure gathering twice a year this group of people to put together the technology radar. It's always great fun and great insights, and we're going to share some of them today in a sneak peek because none of you have seen it yet, but we have.
And to set the stage briefly, especially if you're new to the radar, let me do a quick intro. Okay, the Technology Radar is published twice a year and reflects the real-world experiences from over 10,000 thought workers that are collaborating with clients around the globe. It represents our current, honest opinion on what's working, what's promising, and importantly also what's not. And each item you see on the radar is called a blip. They're organized into 4 rings: the adopt ring, which are blips that we think you should seriously consider using. We've been using them in production in clients. The trial ring, which we use for blips that we think are ready for use, but not as completely proven as those in the adopt ring. We have the assess ring, which we group things to look at closely, but not necessarily trial yet, unless you think they would be a particularly good fit for you. And lastly, hold ring, which we group things that we believe you should proceed with caution. They present significant risks or potential misuse. We're going to be talking about many blips today and across all the different rings and quadrants. And by the way, we group them in 4 quadrants: the techniques, languages and frameworks, platforms, and tools. And since the radar has a limited space for blips, right? The blips may be new to this edition. They may shift rings as our recommendations evolve in different editions. And if the recommendation doesn't change, they may even fade out and disappear from the radar, right? And based on the discussions that happen in the room, right, during the radar creation, there are some emergent patterns that emerge, and these become the themes for the volume. And today, Neil and Nimisha will walk us through a few of the key themes in volume 32, along with some of the related blips. Okay, and also some blips or some topics that were too complex to blip. I think we're going to start with one of them, actually, but they are also worth discussing. So without further ado, I will, Neil, start with you. It's probably no surprise that this edition of the radar is once again rich with AI-related insights, themes, and blips. So one of them is R in RAG, this growing need of effective retrieval, right, in RAG. So could you please tell us more about this and walk us through some of the related blips?
Indeed. So yeah, it's no surprise that there's a lot of AI content, and it's probably worth. So you'll hear today these two terms a lot: blip and theme. Blips are the things that were nominated from projects within ThoughtWorks, and it's important to realize that this is purely our job when we gather face to face is a curation job primarily because we're taking nominations from projects. So we don't actually nominate things. Projects nominate them, and then we deliver them to this face-to-face meeting, and we sift through them. We normally start with 250 or 300 of them, and we're trying to get them down to about 100 because there has to be some limit somewhere. But the only thing that we actually create as a group are these themes because we noticed years ago as we were having discussions about things, including some things that we had deep discussions about, but for one reason or another didn't end up making it on the radar, but there was a strong undercurrent of conversation throughout the week, and we started capturing those things as themes. We now have 3 to 5 themes per radar. That's another constraint because we always start with way more than that. But we vote on these and collaborate on putting them together. And we'll highlight a couple of themes today and a whole lot of blips, including some that we had a lot of discussion about, but ended up not making it on the radar in a category I'll talk about in just a second. The first theme, and even themes this time, we had a lot of AI related things nominated as themes, but we made a conscious effort to decide that only half the themes could be AI related and the other 2 were not because we didn't want it to completely dominate the technology radar. There are other technologies still in the world, despite AI. But one of those is the R in RAG, which is, of course, the retrieval part of retrieval augmented generation. And this was interesting to me for a couple of reasons. One, the number of blips that came up around the R in RAG, lots of different things, including a couple that we will touch on here in just a bit. But the other thing that the sort of meta interesting thing to me about this was the generative AI landscape is evolving so quickly, and there are going to be these little hotspots of innovation that pop up like mushrooms after a rainstorm, and this is a great example of one of those. One piece of this standard part of the LLM Gen AI puzzle suddenly has this burst of innovation because of tooling or techniques or combination of those things. And I expect on the next radar it'll be some other acronym, one other piece of some other acronym that is the big hot topic, but this time for sure it was the R in RAG.
And Neil, I just wanted to add, I think it definitely reflects that. But the other thing is also, it's very interesting about the R in RAG is that it also resonates with the importance of the quality of data and that retrieval of data. And the second theme going to be focused on that as well, but the relevance, precision, the recall of the data, and also the multiple data sources that now with unstructured data, right, really also taking a forefront in the awareness within the organization in addition to structured, and then knowledge graphs. And we're seeing these different patterns in RAG reflecting that external data as well as internal, and leveraging graph-based as well. So, yep.
Indeed, she's foreshadowing one of the other themes, and a lot of times these themes have sort of connective tissue. And this is a great example of one of the AI-related blips that ended up being a category we call too complex to blip. A little bit of explanation is required for that if you're not familiar with the radar lingo. As we talk about these things, ultimately we have to capture these things on our website in a very small type paragraph. And a lot of the things that come up during our meeting, particularly the techniques, are quite nuanced and work well in some situations, but not well in other situations. And they're interesting trade-offs. And it's hard to make a one paragraph statement that encapsulates all that nuance. And so many of in fact, the most interesting topics that we talk about during the week unfortunately fall fate to this category called too complex to blip, which means that it's just too nuanced. And very often those become the subject of podcasts or articles or generate other interesting IP within ThoughtWorks. And one of those was part of this RAG family called corrective RAG, which was a way of So retrieval augmented generation is retrieving. Corrective RAG tries to do on-the-fly corrections using heuristics and other rules and techniques for sort of doing the on-the-fly correction. And we ended up putting this as too complex to blip. One, because there were so many of these RAG blips. In this one, it wasn't clear that it gave you a huge advantage over some of the other techniques that were out there. It looked interesting, but it was not proven yet. So it fell to too complex to blip this time around, but may, if it is promising, may show up again in the future.
And corrective RAG, right, is one of those things where it's correcting the retrieval post-retrieval. And some of the other things we saw, like fusion RAG, was, pre-retrieval and perhaps rewriting the prompt and query right before actually doing the retrieval, or even self RAG, where it's a technique for retraining the model and really even eliminating the need for retrieval in some ways there as well, where the model itself provides better retrieval information. And the other thing about this is also interesting is the latency implications as well, because of the extra corrections and things like that happens. And then therefore the implications on usability because of the higher latency.
But yeah, it's a classic trade-off. And so many of the other AI-related blips, NEMO guardrails moved to trial. It's been there for a while. I think this was the pioneer in the guardrail space. And moving to trial for us means that we've used it in production on at least one project, and I think many projects, including internally at Thoughtworks. And so it's not surprising that NEMO guardrails in that category of AI tools moved to trial this time. Another one that was fascinating for me is the next one, small language models. We talk a lot about large language models, but small language models are fascinating because they are built to run in constrained environments like embedded devices or mobile phones, and they're not as powerful as a large language model, but give you some of the same capabilities, particularly in very constrained problem spaces. And so the idea of having very good LLM-like behavior, but across a very tight, narrow domain is interesting in a lot of different ways. And in fact, that has now moved to trial. We're seeing more and more of this being used in more and more places.
And then I think that also has potential positive impacts around privacy and security as well, right? So you can potentially leverage these in, like you said, in those focused environments and maybe on-prem, but also local devices leveraging a large language model and leading the way to more federated learning technologies.
Now, I think we're going to see a spread of AI capabilities across devices and across the network, and we're going to see more and more granularity and capabilities and building supporting around that. This blip actually generated a whole lot of very interesting discussion and ended up, like many interesting discussions, falling to too complex to blip. Anthropomorphizing large language models, which is a very easy trap to fall into because they're just so good at faking it. So it's very easy to fall into the trap of thinking that large language models have intent or that they can reason or lots of other things. You have to remember that what they return is statistically likely, not necessarily correct. It just so happens that a lot of correct answers are also statistically likely answers, but not always. And so there is a tendency, because they're so good at producing language, to anthropomorphize them, but there's a real danger in doing that, and something you have to be sort of constantly on guard for. And it's bad enough for technologists, but it's even worse for people who don't understand how that what is the Arthur C. Clarke quote, that any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. Large language models are pure magic to a lot of non-savvy technologists. So you have to always keep this in mind.
And Neil, there is someone in the audience, Ben, who's looking forward to anthropomorphizing, oh, that's a tongue twister, LLMs moving to trial at some point. But
well, I certainly dread the day when I have to argue with a large language model on a support call for some sort of organization because something has gone wrong somewhere. I fully expect that to happen, and I'm sure they will be quite anthropomorphic. There's another related blip to this one, which AI accelerated shadow IT, which ended up having a great name, which we ended up putting on hold. And not only does it have a great name, but it's a clear tendency, that a negative tendency that we see around AI, just like any brand new capability. When people started using, for example, data scientists started using notebooks, and then suddenly notebooks were trying to be put into production, and it's hard to put them in production because they don't really support the kind of capabilities we need in production. The exact same thing is happening here, particularly with something that we actually just recorded a podcast about. There's this whole family of things that will pop up sort of behind the scenes here, called under the category of vibe coding or prompt to code, or this idea that, you don't really need a lot of intermediaries between just telling an LLM to produce some application and running the application. And so, just like spreadsheets end up growing beyond what they should be in most organizations, I think a lot of AI solutions end up growing beyond, the little prototype or whatever they meant to be started with. And then they end up growing into IT assets unexpectedly. The convenience is great, of course, and that's the appeal of LLMs, but the problem are things like governance because of security concerns. It's quite common. In fact, a couple of the exemplars for vibe coding out in the world, where they just sort of vibe their way to a little running application, it turns out it has massive security holes in it that compromises some things that weren't important to the little toy site they were building, but doing that too much seemed like a bad idea. So this is the caveat that it's great to use these tools, but realize at some point they have to grow up and become part of the IT ecosystem. Otherwise, they can cause a hazard.
Yeah, I just wanted to underscore that point. I think, Neil, right, in terms of this is a hold, and myself being the first time part of the Doppler team working on these blips, what I found what interesting was just the amount of conversation we have, especially on blips that are going to be moved on hold, because it's a bolder statement that we're making in the industry. And but here, right, like, okay, given that it's on hold, how might you counter it? And some of the things we did talk about is responsible governance, which was another blip that actually didn't make it on the radar this time. But, as you were saying, that the governance and the bounded autonomy, allowing for your organization to innovate and still try out AI, but in bounded means and with the guardrails in place, and really focusing on what is it? What are those guardrails? How do you want to track? Right. And so that does take some predictive human energy, right, to hold back the hows that might be emerging in the industry.
There was one question, Neil and Nimisha, about the shadow IT blip, which is from Jacob. Is there anything emerging in the space of measuring this AI accelerated shadow IT, like of how to measure that? And have you seen anything from our teams?
Well, this is one of those things that I think it would be hard to measure holistically, and generically, but you could certainly look for evidence within your organization. So, for example, how many things are going to production, without going through a deployment pipeline, or some markers like that at the organizational level, I think might be an indicator. Anything that's going into a production-like environment, there should be some checklists or something, whether automated or not, to make sure that's what it says it is. And one of the things that in the rush to get things to take advantage of these capabilities, and this is a separate rant that I won't go too far into here. All the prompt to code and most of the generative code ability is really about generating behavior, which is great for generating algorithmic behavior, but it doesn't take into account the capabilities it may also need to support, like scalability or security or modularity or some of those other things. And so, as developers, we still have to balance those things, which is why you still need a human in the loop, which is why some of these things can be a little bit dangerous.
And then I'll also add, like, one of the other things is just doing some lightweight governance and allowing people to have a place where they can record that they are creating, like micro apps or these types of things that may not be going through the paved roads from the enterprise architecture team. So.
Well, and do what, responsible organizations do with data notebooks or spreadsheets that grow beyond their capabilities is assess them on a regular basis and decide when they've grown up to be a, real application, not a toy anymore, or, a simple project. One last thing about the shadow IT stuff. One of the things that we highlight in this radar are the tools that the coding assistant tools have gotten much more powerful and can now manipulate multiple files and issue terminal commands and things like that. And raise your hand, everyone who has written a shell script that accidentally deleted everything on your hard drive at some point in your developer career. So, letting Gen AI loose to do that makes me a little bit trepidatious, but I'm sure there's some guardrails around that. But shell scripts can be dangerous, so letting AI do some of that kind of stuff is tricky. Anyway, speaking of programming, one of the things that we wanted to highlight in trial is tuple. This is trying to solve a long-standing problem of remote pair programming. We've long been a company that loves to do pair programming. We find that it creates a higher quality code. And a lot of developers just default to pairing on Zoom, which certainly works, but tuple is actually designed to pair with each other. So it gives you some conveniences like quick swapping of who's driving versus who's coding. One of the practices we love at Thoughtworks is ping pong pair programming, where you're doing test-driven development and pair programming, and I write a failing test, and then you have to make that one pass and then write another failing test. And so it forces you to back and forth. So there's no keyboard hog. Well, that's kind of cumbersome if you're having to stop share and so anything that reduces the friction of that common kind of workflow is nice. And tuple does that. It gives you a high resolution sharing environment. It allows you to do quick swapping between who's driving versus who's navigating. So we like tools that support the kind of engineering practices we like and remove friction. So tuple is a great example of one of those on that moved to trial on our radar. And on the counter of that is something that Brigitte, our colleague who specializes in all things AI these days, has written about recently, which is replacing pair programming with AI, which we've put on hold. I believe this was a reblip actually from a previous radar, because we still see people trying to do this. That's often the case with things on hold. We refresh all the blips every radar, but we also go back to the previous radar and look to see if there are things that we need to bring back because we still see it occurring. And this is one of those things. Pair programming, as I mentioned before, is not just one person nodding while the other types. It's an active pursuit where one person's driving, the other's navigating. And AI can't do that. AI can give you assistance on complicated fiddly things, but it's not a replacement for someone. And the way that we used to always describe this is that the person who's actually writing code is in the details of the syntax about, getting things to line up correctly and semicolons and those details. But you need someone who's looking at the forest at the same time, and no person can look at both those things at the same time. And AI can't do that either. So it is not a substitute. It's an aid in programming, not a substitute. So
Yeah,
we're still on that soapbox.
To add the voice of the new Doppler member here myself, I'd say that this also was one of those conversations we had, and it was actually gratifying to see a lot of the intentionality that we have in these blips and thinking about what are those sensible defaults that we have as programmers and bringing that to the forefront, like even with now the advent of AI, what are those fundamental foundational things that we've learned through practicing development for many decades now, and then the implications with working with AI on that. So it was a good discussion there.
Yeah, and these last two blips generated a lot of reactions from the audience. Many people are appreciating the fact that we put replacing pair programming with AI on hold. Some are asking if vibe coding would be related to these blips as well. And there is another question, which is about if we have seen coding assistants being used by one person only, or actually a pair of humans using AI. How has been the format that we commonly see as well?
Well, to answer your second question, yes, every configuration. But, I mean, AI is great for handling fiddly things like, oh, I need a regular expression, or I need a terminal command or something like that. And that benefits either an individual or a pair for, fiddly details and things like that. What was the first question?
There was something about the vibe coding,
Oh
which is
yeah,
an
vibe
emerging.
coding. So this is
Yeah.
a shameless commercial. We recorded a podcast about that, which is going to come out shortly on the Thoughtworks Technology Podcast. So that's a plug for the Thoughtworks Technology Podcast. Vibe coding is this idea of, there was a blog entry that came out that was very influential, and in the defense of the blog entry or Twitter or whatever it was, something on social media. This person was not suggesting that this is something that you should do for real, but we've heard people take it too seriously. So that's what the podcast is about. And it's a great example of something that would be too complex to blip on our radar, but worth a 35-minute conversation on a podcast.
Thank you. All right, so now we're gonna shift gears to another big theme, which is taming the data frontier. A nod to just how vital effective data management, has become in modern organizations. Nimisha, could you share more about the theme, how this came about, and explain a little bit more about it and the related blips to everyone, please?
Yeah, thank you, Renan. So to Stephen's comment earlier in chat, yes, this would be something that's not necessarily AI related. We spent, half of our conversation so far on that. And but of course, with data, there's a little bit of AI as well, right? It's going to be hard not to touch upon that. But there was some intentionality of a lot of our conversations, also not talking specifically about AI, but just some foundational things. And as you said, yeah, so data really is emerging as a strategic asset in organizations. It's really the new currency of businesses, right? It's fueling strategic decision making. It's enhancing customer interactions and personalization. So leveraging data a lot for that. But of course, it's also driving or it is being driven also by AI and predictive analytics and its need for therefore quality data. There's been a challenge for decades, right? We've been wanting to close the feedback loop, right? We've been emitting a lot of data, but then to create high quality data that we can then effectively reuse in applications for personalization and so forth, and also for higher decision making. So really, this is the theme around a lot of our conversations of the blips and tools that technologies that we were seeing coming forth from from the teams on the ground. Tools like for data processing, storage, and orchestration, right? They're a lot more ubiquitous now. A lot of from the Apache suite of tools like Hadoop, Spark, and Flink. There's been some more emerging tools around data quality and metadata management, and you might see the likes of like Atlan and Calibra, Informatica, bringing forth their capabilities in the industry. And then there's also, just like we have DevOps now applying a lot of that ways of thinking into data with data ops for observability and monitoring. So there's a lot there as well. Plus unstructured data, we talked about that as before as well, and that's becoming really a first-class citizen in the data family now, and not just structured data. And then the new API, right? The new orange of APIs now being text. So there's also text to data. Also emerging. So we saw a bunch of different flips and technologies around that. And finally, just want to say, I think with emerging regulations, right, we have GDPR that's been around, but CCPA, HIPAA, and others that are still continuing to emerge, there's a lot of high cost of non-compliance. And so it could be a high cost in orders of millions of, 2 to 4% perhaps of an organization's global annual revenue. And so these types of things are very important to also think about the treatment of data within your organization. So that's the sense of the theme overall.
Yeah, my feeling is for that theme, we ended up talking a lot more about things that ended up making it on the radar, which I think is why that ended up being a theme, because there were so many conversations that focused on some aspect of analytics and data and separation and manipulating and testing. And it was a constant thread.
And some of the needs for it, like in this, right, we're talking about synthesized and tonic .ai, and the needs for data is also not relatively new, while AI being a newer, an advent of it and the higher need for it. But still, there's a lot of need for here. These tools are for creating synthetic data. And that's synthetic data for even software development, where you want to have data that you can then use in your lower environments. And, I think we may have had a blip about not using production data, in lower environments. And then also like creating synthetic data for performance load testing and training your AI models and so forth. So these tools, right, they provide they maintain statistical properties of your production data. And then they're able to generate synthetic and structured and unstructured data, looking at those statistical analytics. And they also go they ensure privacy and compliance, de-identifying data using techniques like hashing and randomization and so forth. And then integrated into the build pipeline. So that's key to making that a sensible default for your organization. And what we're seeing now is that previously we blipped something like Synthetic Data Vault, which was a library of tools, right? But now what we're seeing is the evolution of that, where now these vendors are creating platforms of comprehensive self-serve experiences for these tools.
And this is a great connective tissue to the AI stuff we are talking about before, but what a perfect use for, we've got a giant pattern matching mechanism we can attach to our project. What sort of nasty chore do we need giant pattern matching for? And test data and synthesizing data based on statistically likely production data is a perfect use for this. So it's a great ancillary use, and it's a great example of a niche use of generative AI where it fits just perfectly, and we see that reflected on several of the blips on this radar.
Yeah, and that's great. Since we're talking about some platforms and tools that are coming up in the radar, there is one question more like a clarifying on how we blip things, which is about cost. Is cost considered when analyzing the tools, platforms that we blip? And if so, how is the return of this investment being measured? Maybe we could spend some time talking about explaining how we blip things, how we come up with opinions, and if you consider things like cost or not.
We do consider cost. We favor open source tools. We've long had a history of liking open source tools, and we favor those, but that does not prevent us from putting blips for commercial tools when we think it fills a particular need or space. This is all driven by our experience on projects. So we're not actually cruising out into the marketplace looking for tools to evaluate. These are things that happen on our projects. So our clients have chosen these tools, and we thought they were good. So in the case of commercial tools, but we try to favor toward open source, but there are some cases where commercial tools are the ones that fit the bill. Particularly when you get to things like large data or cloud providers. I mean, there are no open source cloud providers, so it's hard to be completely commercial agnostic in that space.
And you notice that these particular tools right here, synthesized tonic, are in the assess category. So these are ones that may not have actually necessarily been leveraged at wider adoption right now, but there are teams on the ground who are trying these out at our clients. The next one, right, is Databricks Delta Live Tables, and that one is more in trial. And this is also yet another commercial tool here, but this is speaking to now the developer experience for data engineers. And DLT, it provides a declarative approach for data operations, right? So managing your pipelines in a declarative way. It supports real-time streaming as well as batch processing and materialized views for incremental updates and performance optimization. So these are all self-service experiences, and it's a for if you have a simple, relatively simple pipeline that you're managing, these types of off-the-shelf tools support that well. For more complex pipelines, you might need to do a lot more custom work. But a lot of our teams are finding this very useful, and so we're moving it further in. So from before it was on assess, and now it's in trial. And the next one is going a little bit, backing up a little bit, the thinking behind this, and we're all, right, what we're seeing in this Teaming the Data Frontier theme is around data product thinking. And this too, we had some good conversations actually, because just like Hold, where we have, we want to be, we have many debates on it, even here, moving something like this type of, paradigm shift in thinking about data, we're moving this to adopt. So there is a good conversation about this. So here it's all about treating data as a product. And the reason why we were after a debate, we came to an understanding, and you'll see this in our blip description, that regardless of the architecture, whether you're using Lakehouse or data mesh or whatnot, just starting to really think of structured data and unstructured data, right, as a product, which means thinking about this lifecycle management, from prioritization, applying design thinking to it, versioning, retirement of your data, to that then it leads to the adoption and the ROI that you're looking for in your organization, discovering and reusing that data, and really emphasis on the metadata along with the data, and it's business metadata and technical metadata. So a lot of good conversation around it and experiences from a lot of our teams that are helping our clients through their data and AI transformations.
In my opinion, we've gotten too conservative on both Hold and Adopt because they do generate so much controversy. We'll see a Hold in a bit that will generate a bunch of controversy, but I was glad to see that data product thinking made it to Adopt, because it's separate from data mesh, which it's considered part of data mesh, although it is separate from and predates data mesh, but it is just a good idea all by itself, whether you're doing data mesh or not. So it's worth calling out, and it was good to see that it made it to Adopt.
Yeah, I agree. And I think there is a comment here, which is it's very hard to adapt to the data product concept. So some reactions to the concept itself and how difficult it is to adapt at the enterprise level to that. And a question that is related to the theme, which is how much inefficiency is being created by the growth of data platforms and tools in companies, in your opinion?
I'll tackle the first question first. About data product thinking. Yeah, it's tough. Just like product thinking is tougher than project thinking. Good things come with overhead, but you can't focus on, oh, it's going to cause overhead. You have to focus and balance the trade-offs for what benefits is it going to provide for me. And it gives you the exact same benefits of product thinking. So we've long been advocates of product thinking on software projects, and this is really just translates that to treating analytical data as its own product, because in many ways, in many organizations, it has the same life cycle as its own product. Obviously, if you're not in an organization, if you're in an organization where that's not true, you shouldn't adopt this. But we see it in so many organizations, and we see quite commonly the negative side effects of not thinking this way more than we see the positive side effects of thinking this way. I think I'm safe to say that we keep seeing companies get nabbed by not thinking about this and having to regroup projects and can't get things maintained, and all of the analytics which should be driving the decision making of the company gets stale and out of date, and is not serving its good value purpose.
And as any other paradigm shift, yes, it is a challenge, right? As Neil is saying, and you just foreshadowing also, we'll be talking about Agile soon, but that too, right, being a very difficult one. I mean, maybe at this point, people might say, oh, that might be a no-brainer, but actually to really adopt it truly, it is a challenge. And that's what we're finding even for data product thinking and really to tame the data frontier once again, right? This is the technique that we're finding is working when it is done well, but how do you do it well, right? So, and the second question about the inefficiencies, I'll just say that in order to do this and do it at scale, that's where these platforms from vendors and others could help accelerate. However, I do want to say that we're finding that the industry is still catching up, and a lot of I'm finding that the external platforms don't necessarily have data product linking natively as part of their core design and architecture. So, they would also need to adapt a little bit. There are some new startups in the place, like the Modern Data Company and whatnot, that are, creating a data OS with this from the center out. So these are things you have to keep in mind, leveraging something that's a third party and then customizing it for yourself. So where is that 2080, implementation to make up for things that they might have and may not have and what you need.
Yeah, and in terms of efficiency, I mean, it's a trade-off. I mean, if your number one goal is efficiency, then you wouldn't do microservices, you wouldn't do domain-driven design, you wouldn't do a lot of distributed architectures. You'd build mainframe applications probably, or build something in assembly language that runs very close to the metal and make it as efficient as possible. Oh, it's not the only concern. Oh, there are a bunch of other concerns. So it's this balance of trade-offs of, yes, it's creating some inefficiencies, but what kind of value is it adding? That's the thing you always have to evaluate. And we're not saying that this is going to add value to every organization. We're saying that organizations should look to see, does it potentially add value to the organization? That's what we're encouraging people to experiment with.
Yeah, thank you both. Now we also want to explore a few blips that kind of transcend any single theme. There are topics that are broader in scope, sometimes potentially more impactful as well. So, before we jump into some of them, I'll take the opportunity to answer Alexander's question, which is, can Radar be applied to team management frameworks like Lean, Kanban, Scrum? The answer is yes, and they show up quite often as blips in the radar as well. As a matter of fact, we're going to see one soon here. The speakers will talk in more details about it. So without further ado, let's jump into some of these blips.
This one I found very interesting. It was too complex to blip, so it didn't make it on. But it's about AI and design systems, and it was two different perspectives. In our discussion, it was like AI for building design systems, just like we have AI for software delivery, for design systems. And the second one was actually designing UI for AI systems. So the first one is all about, hey, when you want to generate UI elements or automate your tasks like resizing or maintaining style consistency, right? All of those things you could leverage AI to accelerate design work. We're talking about UI design here. And, even maybe recommending and predicting changes from monitoring user behavior and user interactions on your web or mobile experiences and leveraging AI for that. But the gotchas here to make sure that, from a human-centered design aspect, the AI generate UI elements, they still resonate with human emotions. And, we want to make sure that there's no bias that gets introduced with AI, maybe not maintaining accessibility for all users and so forth. But the second one is actually also, I think, more interesting from my perspective, the second way of thinking about designing UI for AI systems. And there it's, I think it's a new paradigm shift here too, where you're thinking AI first design system. You're no longer thinking about just, not that you were before either, but there's colors and grids and pixel alignment and these atomic theory of building these UI elements, from small to larger and so forth. But now it's a fundamental human pattern shift of adapting and to this mental shift of non-deterministic outcomes and outputs from the AI, and you're a lot more conversational. So you're also designing now for things that are, maybe shifting from visible and static to something that's more unseen and dynamic and intelligent. So for example, like interfaces that were more click or drag to like summarize, automate, create, and so forth. So, and even with AI agents as well, there's, thinking about orchestrating AI and people and technology all together in a seamless, intuitive way might be, really interesting to think about what might be some design patterns and ways of thinking there. And then the next one, this one was also too complex to blip. And this one, we had a good discussion about this as well. And this came from one of our product principals in North America. And she made this bold statement about, hey, look, Agile practices without measurement of incremental value is just not worth implementing. And the statement is coming from some experiences where we're finding that, well, the first principle of from the Agile manifesto, right, is our highest priority being to satisfy customers through early and continuous delivery of valuable software. And I think there's sometimes this miss of the valuable software, and this is value to your customers or value to your business. And we're finding that clients are following the Agile practices, but it's maybe more through like cargo cult copy of the processes and the ceremonies and tools. So this goes back to that earlier point of like, it's hard and it is a challenge, and there's change management within the organization to shift people from maybe project mindset of feature development and feature outputs to, thinking more about delivering and measuring through like incremental value and lifetime support of that value. So that's what this blip was about.
If I remember correctly, you were particularly interested in getting this one on the radar and failed to win the room on this one.
I did fail on this one. It's a little bit of a new thing.
It was a worthy effort. You gave it a good go. I remember, including maybe even a lifeboat. We have a lifeboat exercise where at the end of the exercise you can try to come back and reconvince the room about something. But this is one of those things that you see a lot of the founders of the Agile movement decry often of people that are not paying attention to what they were talking about. As Agile moved into a buzzword in the industry, many of the actual practices and particularly around engineering, which we've always been fond of. So periodically we decry this on our radar, and this is the most recent version of that. If you're going to use these engineering practices, you should know what they're there for, and don't just do lip service. If Nim had not mentioned cargo culting, I was going to mention cargo culting, because that's the most common thing of going through the motions of something, not understanding why, going through the motions and expecting something to happen that may or may not happen. Which brings us to always controversial things. Safe on hold. This is a reblip. This actually originally showed up on hold years and years ago, but it's one of those things that we keep running into in organizations. Some of the things that the reason that the CTO attends this meeting is that some of these blips the CTO has to eventually anoint to say, yes, we're willing to make a statement about that. But we had a strong argument by multiple regions in the room that they keep seeing people do this. It's not that it's inherently a bad thing. Hold doesn't mean stop doing it right away. It means don't start anything new in it. We understand organizations' motivation to do this, but in general, most of these frameworks like this try to replace feedback loops with bureaucracy. And we would rather have feedback loops in place rather than some sort of bureaucracy. So this can be done extremely well. In fact, it was argued quite persuasively in the room that it has been done well and can be done well, but we still see too many organizations cargo culting this and treating this as, the prescriptive way to solve their problems when they have very complex problems that could require a little bit deeper thought.
Yeah, a lot of reactions from the audience regarding this one. And some people are appreciating having something to point to when having discussions internally in their organizations about SAFe. So Thanks, Neil. Thanks, Namisha. Just a time check. We have 10 minutes left. We are gonna pretty much end the blips soon and try to squeeze a few more questions by the end of it. We still have some time. So the next one being open telemetry.
Yes, and this one is, very much, we can put it on the bucket of like not AI necessarily, but we've been watching the evolution of this since about 2017. You'll see this in our radar. There it started to really think about, hey, microservices becoming complex to trace requests across services. And so that we were seeing these open libraries come forth for observability, including tracing and logs and metrics and so forth. And around 2020, we saw the merger of open tracing and open census, and they were integrating with Prometheus and other tooling there. And now on this radar, we're shifting this to adopt. In 2023, we saw the release of the open telemetry protocol, and there it started supporting gRPC in addition to HTTP. So, a lot of standardization is excellent. The standardization of the format and the transmission of the data, and now it's being adopted by vendors. So we're seeing Datadog, New Relic, Grafana adopting these, and this is great too. I think as a standard. We're able to collaborate across the industry to extend this and advance it. So, for instance, compressing log files right into gzip and to be able to scale the telemetry work that we're doing as well. So, very fundamental, right, when it comes to observability and making sure that we are finding ways to monitor and introspect, right, our code through tools like this, and standards are a great way of advancing us forward.
Now, Mark Richards, my co-author, and I facetiously there's a famous list of the fallacies of distributed computing, and we're facetiously adding a few to that list. And one of them is that observability is optional, which is a fallacy in distributed architectures. It's not optional. You absolutely need it, particularly at scale. And so we're happy to see more standardization around that. And the last one of these will be quick. This is actually a reblip from move from trial to adopt. Software bill of materials. You need to know what's inside your software because AI makes attack vectors even easier than ever before. Numerous instances of software dependencies becoming attack vectors. And so this is going to become one of those just responsible technology things that you have software bill of materials for every piece of software. You can quickly assess exactly what's in it in case of vulnerabilities or security faults or just from a knowledge standpoint or dependency analysis. We're seeing more and more of companies adopting this, and we think it's a good idea. So it has moved into to adopt. And that leaves us some time for some questions, I think.
Yeah, one that is related to software bill of materials. If you have seen any standards or formats that are winning the race in the market, or any standards that are becoming the de facto standards.
I have not. Tools like Dependabot have become part of GitHub, so that makes it sort of a de facto standard, as GitHub is sort of a de facto standard. But we see a variety of these tools. So I think we highlighted the technique more than we did a particular tool, which we do sometimes if there's a variety of tools in a space and there's no clear winner. But we want to encourage the technique. We'll put it in techniques instead of a specific tool. Although we do like if there's a specific tool that does something well, we try to be as specific as possible, but some of those techniques get lumped together like that.
And there are tools that you can put into your CI/CD pipelines as well, right? So that could help accelerate some of this, but like Sneak being one of them, and maybe Trivy and Sift, I think were ones that we had talked about. Yeah.
Part of the audience is playing Tech Radar bingo, where blips match what they're actually doing. There were a few bingos here in the audience, super fun. Thanks
the real bingo card comes out on April 2nd when the actual radar comes out.
Exactly, I was about to say that. This is just a sneak peek, folks. Like there will be more than 100 blips in the actual official release that's coming up on April 2nd. Well, we're pretty much about out of time, I think. I will try to squeeze one more question, which is from Marisa. Marisa, old friend of ours, which blip led to the longest or most intense debate during the meeting?
That's a good question. It could have been the value agnostic agile or something around data. That or maybe one of the AI things. AI, it was a lot of the conversation here, obviously, but the most conversation had to be something that we always reserve the techniques, particularly trial and hold for a morning because it's going to be long and arduous to get through them. So those usually generate a lot of discussion. And a lot of them end up being in a category that we refer to as stupidity on hold, where, teams are just doing something that you just shouldn't do. It's just not a good idea. But the companies are doing it. And so people want to put it on the radar and say, stop doing that. And it's like, but you can't tell people to stop doing something that just they shouldn't be doing anyway. So some of those end up being in that category, but
I'd like to add that the not necessarily a blip, but it was actually in the last day where we are now trying to figure out what themes go in there, given our conversations from the previous day, what themes should be there. And I really appreciate the conversation, right? Because like I said, I was the first time there, and the conversation in the room was really thinking about, okay, guys, it's not all AI. Initially a lot of our themes that were being, put together, high percentage, if not all, was AI. And then we actually went back and we thought through again of like, okay, what are the themes here? Could we look through a little bit more intentionally of like what might be there? And so you'll see that the themes that came out, like they're 50% AI. So there's 4 themes, 2 of which are more squarely in the bucket of AI and the other 2 aren't. I think just having that conversation, just reminding us that, the development work we're doing, and there's some foundational work that regardless of AI, we want to continue to do as responsible technologists. So I thought that was a great conversation. Having said that, on the other hand, if you do squint, maybe all 4 of them are still related to AI. So, right? Because how can you, because AI being a consumer for some of this as well. So just
it
wanted
is
to,
2025 after all.
yeah.
All right, so I think with that, let me see if we can fit one more question here. Well, there is one comment. I would love to hear Nimisha's point of view on agnostic agile, which is one comment here. Nimisha, do you want to add anything? I think maybe.
Agnostic agile?
Yes.
You mean value agnostic agile?
Yep.
Yeah, the too complex to blip, I think.
Right,
Talking about.
right. Yeah. So I think when I was sharing that, right, it was really about God, it's so frustrating, right? Because you wanna go and work at your clients, and there's limited time to show value. From a change management standpoint, you really want to have early wins and celebrate them to continue that effort and bring everyone along. So from that standpoint, if you go in there and you're like, okay, we have this many months of delivery, and then if the organization, the client yet hasn't gone through the effort, it's one of those things you have to exercise the muscle to really know, okay, what is good agile and what does that look like? And some of us have had the opportunity to experience it, and we want to share that with others. And agile is not a silver bullet where it applies everywhere, I understand that, but for where it does apply. So that's where I think that frustration was coming through, and wanting to bring that to the forefront.
Thank you, Nimisha. Thank you, Neil. I encourage you to look at the chat window because there is many messages congratulating you and thanking you for the insightful discussion and all the things that you shared with us today. We are approaching the end of our webinar, so thank you again for the engaging discussion, for everyone joining us across the globe. And again, this was just a sneak peek. The Technology Radar Volume 32 will be released soon on April 2nd, and will be packed with over 100 tips. So keep an eye out for the full publication, and also be able to find a recording of this session available in our official channels out there. So thank you all for joining us, and see you next time.